Hello and welcome to the complete guide to A-level history for AQA. What we're going to do here is just give a very brief overview of both the structure of the course, the kinds of things you're going to have to be looking at, the components, the two main components that you're going to have to do, the exam components. We're not going to reference the coursework components in specific detail in this lesson, because we have a separate lesson dedicated to that specifically, and then also look at the kinds of exam questions you'll be asked and how they are structured and the kinds of ways in which you might be able to answer them. So first, the structure of the course. So the A-level history is split into three main components. You have two exams and you'll have one piece of independent coursework. If you want more information about the independent coursework, like I've said, there will be a lesson linked in the description below and also on screen for you to just go over to there to find information about them. So the A-level history requires that there be both a sufficient amount of depth in your study as well as a sufficient amount of breadth in your study, and you will see this theme run through the rest of the specification as we go through it. So the specification requires that students study the history of more than one country or state, and this includes at least one being outside the British Isles. So you have to study either European history or an aspect of American history or Asian history, or even aspects of sort of global history. Modules like the Cold War would be seen as a sort of global history, and also the module on international relations. Aspects of history again have to be done in the components between breadth and depth. This theme will run through, and there has to be a range of appropriate historical perspectives. This includes the likes of things like cultural, economic and ethnic perspectives, as well as political or religious perspectives, and there are obviously others. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are the kinds of things that we have to be thinking about when we are studying for A-level history. So the students will also have to study topics from a chronological range of at least 200 years. This sounds like a lot, but if you go over to look at the coursework video that we've done, you'll find that you have to study at least 100 years of history in your extended essay for your coursework. So really that takes up half of the study, and the other 100 years will be consistent within the exams. A substantial and coherent element of this 200 years will have to also be at least British history. So there has to be some element of British history that is also substantial and coherent. This means that you will be doing at least one of your components will have to be a British history component, and the other one will be non-British history, because as we've just mentioned, you have to study from at least one state or country outside of the British Isles. So let's talk about the historical components in more detail, the two main historical components. So we have an option from component 1, that you'll be able to study a period of history from component 1, and there's also an option to study history from component 2. These both must be studied. Of these components, one of them will have to be British history to meet this minimum requirement that we just specified in the last slide, and the other one will have to be non-British history. Component 1 is what we would describe as the breadth study, and this means that there is a broader area of study, and when we go through the components on each of the modules, each of the subjects that you could study, you will notice that the time periods of history that you're studying in component 1 differ significantly from that of component 2. And this is because component 2 is the depth study. This means that the area of study is much shorter, and you'll be studying this area in more depth. So just because you'll be studying a smaller range of history, a shorter period of history in component 2 than component 1, don't think that means that there is less that you're going to have to study, because you'll be studying it in more depth. So the components, there are some components that are not allowed to be studied together, and this is because there's a strong correlation with regard to the themes and the period of history studied. So if you were to study these two of these components together, you would only be studying a very limited range of history from a very limited period, a limited century, and probably a lot of crossover and overlap between the kinds of histories that you're studying. And it's for that reason that we don't, you won't be allowed to study two components together that have this overlap. And there are two examples of this that are specified in the AQA specification. These are the component 1 module on the Tudors and the component 2 module on the Reformation of Europe. Again, this is because they are within a very within a very similar period of history, and there is definitely a lot of overlap between the Tudors, specifically Henry VIII, and the Reformation of Europe. And then the second one is the Stuarts, Crisis of the Monarchy, and also France and Europe, the module on the Sun King Louis the 14th. And this again is because there is a significant amount of overlap in both the kinds of things that you'll see between these two modules, but there's also a very limited range of history studied. These are both things that periods of history that happen effectively at the same time. So let's begin by talking about the breadth study. There are a wide range of content available for the Paper 1 exam, and I'm not going to read them all out and list them here. I'm just going to give you all the options available for you here. Now, you'll notice that there are quite broad ranges of history. Like I've said, this is the breadth study, so you actually study quite a wide period. So, for example, if you were to take the last option, the Germany Quest for Political Stability, you would be studying from 1871 all the way up to 1991. Similarly, if you were to take the British Empire module, you'd be studying from 1857 to 1967. Compare this to the depth study, where you have components, more components, but you'll be studying a smaller period of history. So, for example, Reformation of Europe is only from 1500 to 1564, and you also have, for example, the module on the American Civil War being from 1845 to 1877, and there are more on the other page here as well. So these are all of the options for both the Paper 1 and Paper 2. So in terms of assessments, the components will consist of exams of length 2.5 hours. You'll be asked to answer 3 questions. One of them is a compulsory question, and the other 2 is you have choice questions. So what this means is there will be a list of 3 questions to answer, and you'll given the choice to answer 2 of the 3, so you'll not answer the one that you don't like the most. And there'll be a total of 80 marks for each paper, and they both represent 40% of the total grade. So let's begin by talking about essay questions, because essay questions are the ones that are consistent across both papers. So you'll have to do essay questions in Paper 1, and you'll also have to do essay questions in Paper 2. In both questions, you'll be asked these kinds of style of essay questions, and these are also the optional questions, which means you'll have a choice to answer 2 of 3 questions available, and they'll often take a few kinds of structure, a few kinds of forms. The first are the quotation-based essay questions. These will take the form of some kind of quote, and you will have to assess the validity of the quote. So the quote will often be some kind of proposition or formal statement of fact, and you are asked to assess the validity of the particular opinion that is within the quote. So, for example, there's a quotation here saying that the most important reason for Parliament's victory in the First Civil War was Scottish support, and you're asked to assess the validity of this claim. And effectively, this is what you would write in your essay question. You will talk about the ways in which this proposition is valid using historical references, and also ways in which it is invalid, and try and come up with a balanced conclusion to try and come to a balanced argument, and then come to some kind of final conclusion. The second kind of questions are to what extent questions, and again, these are very easy. To what extent was Johnson more significant than Kennedy in advancing civil rights for African Americans? You'll notice that this is a very similar kind of question to the first, which means that you don't actually have to change the way in which you answer these questions depending on the type of question you're asked. It's just the questions are structured and written in a different way, and I didn't want any examples of these questions to throw anybody if they were ever going to an exam and not know how to answer these questions. They effectively require the same kinds of skills. The final kind are the how far or how significant kind of questions. So, for example, how significant was Thomas Jefferson in the development of the ideology of revolution in the years 1774 to 1776? Again, this is very similar to the quotation type of question in the sense that it's asking you to assess the validity of a particular view or a particular claim. It's asking you to effectively assess the significance of Thomas Jefferson in the development of ideology of revolution between 1774 and 1776, and so therefore, again, the way in which you answer these questions are no different for each of the types, but I just thought it would be important to reference the kinds of questions that you might be asked in case that might throw you in an exam. For more information about how to answer the essay questions specifically, looking at the mark schemes and looking at the kinds of objectives that you need to be hitting in order to get the top grades, there's a video linked on the screen and in the description below. The second kind of questions are the compulsory questions, and there are two kinds of compulsory questions. One of them is only available in paper 1 and the other one is only available in paper 2. The one that is only available in paper 1 are the extract questions, and with the extract questions, you will be given 3 extracts, and these extracts are taken from historical documents. By that I mean like books or articles written by historians, and in those extracts there will be a number of arguments made about a particular period of history, and you are asked to assess how convincing these arguments are, and you have to use your own understanding of historical context to do so. So you might be given 3 extracts that talk about Henry VII's foreign policy, for example, and you might be asked to look at the arguments within these extracts and determine whether or not they are convincing with reference to how successful Henry VII was in his foreign policy, or maybe why he was successful. And these historians might be giving different reasons as to why Henry VII's foreign policy was successful, and you have to use those arguments and to compare them to your knowledge of history to come to some kind of understanding about which of the extracts are more convincing in relation to this particular subject area. Again, if you want to see this in more detail, I've got a lesson specifically on extract questions that I'll link in the description below. The final is the source question, and this is only available for paper 2, and this again is the compulsory question for paper 2. And with source questions, you are given 3 primary sources, and a primary source is a source that is written or made at the time in which we are studying. So whereas the extracts will refer to an historian, maybe a book by a historian or an article by an historian, a source is by the people who we are studying in the period of time that we are studying it. And you're asked to assess their validity with reference to a particular subject area, their validity to an historian. So you're asked to take a source and to see how valid it would be to an historian. If an historian is studying this area of history, how valid is this source in coming to the truth about what actually happened in this period of history? So for example, you could be talking about a letter written from somebody to somebody else, and how valid is that source for somebody who wants to study this period of history. And in order to do so, you have to not just talk about the content of the source and reference that to historical context, but you also have to talk about the nature of the source, what kind of source it is. Is it a speech? Is it a letter? Is it is it a news article, etc., etc. But you also then have to talk about who is it by, who wrote the source. Does this particular person have a particular political bias? Do they have is there some reason why what they are saying might not be true because of what we know about this particular person? Again, back to the nature of the source. The nature of the source could tell us different things, because if it's a propaganda piece, if it's an article in a newspaper that's supposed to be propaganda, then it's less likely to be true compared to if it was a private letter to an individual where there's some kind of conveyance of truth. And you also have to think about things like the whereabouts, the time period that the source was written in. If you are studying something in relation to an event that happened in 1776, for example, having a letter as a source written in 1775 isn't going to be as valuable as a source that's written in 1777, because you're going to have more information because of the event that took place. So you have to place the source not only within the context of the nature of the source and who wrote the source, but you also have to place it within the context of the history that you're studying, because we're studying history from the perspective of somebody who is where all this has already happened, but this person might be writing at a period where some of these things may not have happened, and this is really where it requires you to have quite a deep understanding of the events that are taking place and the period of history that you're studying. Again, for more information about specifically how we answer these questions, take a look in the description below or on screen in the moment. We'll have the video on source questions linked there. If you want to look at how to do the coursework, how to really structure your coursework and how to get the top marks in that, there will be a link in the description below, as I've already said. And if there are any other questions, leave them in the comments below.